Because knowing now what I know about the hidden hand and the propaganda and the incredible insight that the advertising and the marketing industries have in our biological, neurological functioning, and they know exactly which buttons to press in order to get whatever emotion they are looking for. They are corralling our emotions. They are herding us like sheep. And it is only when you stop and think about your emotions and say, on the hierarchy of emotions, where are we? If you're out down at the base emotions of passion and anger and outrage, you are being played. You are the puppet on a string. Oppenheimer, the movie, has received nominations, Oscar nominations for just about every single category. And also today is a very particularly important day, the 26th of January, 2024. The International Court of Justice has just given its verdict on the genocide case brought against the State of Israel by the Republic of South Africa. The saddest part about this whole thing is that it was necessary. That the moral compass of our leadership is so askew that something that is morally insupportable had to be brought before the court. Whether the leadership will do anything to rectify the situation now remains to be seen. And this leadership, this weak leadership, is really what I think the film Oppenheimer is all about. How it came to be that our leaders have become so bad. 2024 is also a year in which many of us around the world will be going to the polls to choose, vote for our next leaders. And it's shocking to me that for so many of us, it's a choice of the worst or the best of two evils. And no matter what we choose, we are sure to be disappointed. How did all of our progress, all of our technological advancement come to this, that the human product of all of this progress is so poor? That, seeing as I'm talking about Oppenheimer, let's focus on America, seeing as the most powerful, most developed democracy in the world can only give the populace a choice of, it appears to be, a choice between two geriatric old men who are both suffering from or verging on the brink of dementia. How is that possible? I believe we need to go back around about 110 years in order to start to find the start of this particular modern version of weak leadership. And this step back into history also takes us into the world of Oppenheimer, into the world that Oppenheimer was born into. This is a world that is hidden, was hidden to most of us. But the internet, for just a brief moment, allowed us to draw away the curtain. With the introduction of artificial intelligence into the internet, it is really the sort of atomic moment for the internet. AI is turning everything into chaos. Knowledge is hard to come by, which is I reverted, as you can see here, to reading books, particularly older books. And also on the internet, I've reverted to actually finding PDF files. The thing about a PDF file, it cannot be changed. That's the point of a PDF file. So, yes. So, back to Oppenheimer and the world in which he was living. So, something that happened, which was a seismic event in the finance industry, happened in a tiny place in Jekyll Island that I stumbled upon in my travels. I was sort of reaching the end of my round-the-world trip, and I was on my way from Miami to Charleston and on my way, I was sort of heading along the coast of Georgia, and I needed to find a place to sleep. And my normal way, I look at the map and go, well, that looks interesting. And so what looked interesting to me on that particular day was a place called Jekyll Island. And when I arrived there, I thought, well, this is highly unusual. There were holiday cottages on this island that looked like mansions. So, of course, I looked it up and discovered that I had inadvertently landed on an island that was the playground of the robber barons of the Gilded Age. And the Jekyll Island Club, which was now a golf club, indeed at the time belonged to J.P. Morgan. Now, J.P. Morgan and his attitude towards honor and honesty is important in our whole story of Oppenheimer and indeed of the political leadership that we see today. J.P. Morgan was of the opinion that an honest man was a man who once bought remained bought. So, but what is important to us, and in sort of setting the stage for the world that Oppenheimer lived in, was that on the 22nd of November 1910, 7 men representing 1/4 of the world's wealth gathered here under such secrecy that even the regular servants were replaced with strangers. And it reads like a spy thriller. Picture a party of the nation's greatest bankers stealing out of New York on a private railroad car under cover of darkness, stealthily riding hundreds of miles south, embarking on a mysterious launch, sneaking onto an island deserted by all but a few servants, living there a full week under such rigid secrecy that the name of not one of them was once mentioned, lest the servants learn their identity and disclose to the world the strangest, most secret expedition in the history of American finance. I am not romancing. I am giving to the world for the first time the real story of how the famous Aldrich Currency Report, the foundation of our new currency system, was written. The utmost secrecy was enjoined upon all. The public must not glean a hint of what was to be done. Senator Aldrich notified each one to go quietly into a private car, which the railroad had received orders to draw up on an unfrequented platform. Off the party set. New York's ubiquitous reporters had been foiled. Nelson Aldrich had confided to Henry, Frank, Paul, and Piat that he was to keep them locked up at Jekyll Island, out of the rest of the world, until they had evolved and compiled a scientific currency system for the United States, the real birth of the present Federal Reserve System. Close quotes. So the upshot of all of this was the creation of a banking system in which the printing of currency, the creation of fiat money, was taken out of the hands of the American people and those whom they voted into power and put into the hands of the privileged few. So that was a massive shift of power. So now it was those who controlled the Federal Reserve, then and now, that told the politicians what they may or may not do, what they would or would not print money for. So when the politicians are singing and dancing for their supper, they are not actually trying to please the public. Well, they are. They're sort of an impossible situation. What they're really trying to do is convince the Federal Reserve. Around about 10 years later, a man called Eddie Bernays is whipped out of obscurity in that he is employed by the state, by the American government, to create a propaganda campaign to convince the American public to join the First World War. This propaganda campaign is so successful that Eddie Bernays, ever the salesman, understands that more can be done with this manipulating of the minds of the masses than just in the political sphere. So he combines his knowledge to sell things with the theories of his uncle, who happens to be Sigmund Freud. And he sells this mind control affair to the corporations of America, who are only too happy with the idea of controlling the masses by appealing to their unconscious desires, thereby convincing them to buy whatever products the corporations produced. Soon Eddie Bernays was the toast of the US, working with a who's who of corporations. And slowly but surely he made his way up the hierarchy of power, until in his book Propaganda he wrote, and I quote, "There are invisible rulers who control the destiny of millions. It is not generally realized to which extent the words and actions of our most influential public men are dictated by shrewd persons operating behind the scenes." Close quote. This is from Eddie Bernays' Propaganda. And this is the world into which Oppenheimer is born, in which people must be trained to desire, to want new things even before the old had been entirely consumed. We must shape a new mentality in America. Man's desires must overshadow his needs. This is Paul Mazur of the Lehman Brothers. And so the bankers were now in control of printing the currency that we all needed in order to survive in this socioeconomic structure. And they were also using all sorts of mind control techniques. Our passions and inner desires were focused on. And this is the world into which Oppenheimer was born. He belonged to the demographic that has always known privilege in a patriarchal system. And his privilege is apparent in the film Oppenheimer. He is a young man, he is brilliant, which of course affords him even more luxuries and privilege. But he is an untested man. He is a man who has never had to work hard for anything. And in the movie Oppenheimer, Christopher Nolan makes no bones about this. He shows Oppenheimer for what he is, a weak man, lacking moral fiber, lacking self-control, and this is shown in graphic detail in the scene, which needn't have been put in the movie, but it was put there, the poison apple, that Oppenheimer prepared and was quite happy for a professor that upset him to eat. He was prepared to go to that length, unthinking, passionate, uncontrolled behavior. And in his social circle in America, in the university, he was also shown to be a man who flip-flopped. He flip-flopped between political convictions, saying he always liked to keep a back door open. He kept women on the string, one of which was his lover for years. He was quite happy to flirt and have affairs with married women, even if those women were married to his own friends. So we really are seeing a man who is quite assured of his own superiority, lacking self-control. And so the question is, why would anyone want to make a movie about such a man? And also, why would anybody choose such a man to run such an important project as well, one of the sort of branches of the Manhattan Project? If you wanted to make a heroic movie about the creation of the atomic bomb, General Groves would have been a far better choice. He was in charge of the entire project. Oppenheimer was only in charge of Los Alamos, one part of this enormous thing. Okay, fine, the most spectacular part, because that's where you actually see the bomb exploding, and don't we all love explosions? Our passion sort of appeals to our most primitive beings. But why would General Groves have chosen Oppenheimer. As he says himself, he says, brilliance is taken for granted in these circles. So why choose Oppenheimer? It's in the train scene that we see why. General Groves knew that he could control Oppenheimer, because Oppenheimer, due to his lack of self-control, lack of moral standards, was compromised. He had strings that could be tweaked to make Oppenheimer jump. And that's exactly what Oppenheimer's role was. He was a marionette manager to keep all the other scientists in check. And he did it really well. Oppenheimer was, in essence, a corporate man. A man once bought remained bought. And this comes throughout the movie. I mean, his wishy-washiness and what he expects of his wife drives her to drink. Finally, his mistress commits suicide, or it's a bit ambivalent, but so it seems in the movie. He continues to have affairs with the wives of his friends. And throughout the movie, he whines about he didn't have a choice. I had no choice. Did he have a choice? Well, then we need to look at something else that was happening at the same time. So America and the Allied forces were propelled into this atomic bomb situation by the fear that Hitler was in fact creating an atomic bomb. And so they felt that they needed to get the bomb before Hitler. And what they did was that they went to Germany and they tried to purloin the science and even the scientists with the justification that if they didn't, Russia would. If we don't, they will. Pretty much the way things work. But something happens in 1941, in September, in Copenhagen, that tells us that choices can always be made. So one of the scientists, the German scientists who were laboring under the Nazi regime, Heisenberg meets up with Niels Bohr and says, we don't have the capacity to build the bomb. We're not building the bomb. And according to the Heisenberg version of the story, it was in order that the Allies would stop building a bomb as well. Niels Bohr reads this as the German scientists trying to stop the Allies from progressing with the bomb. And so the bomb carries on. But later, they detain all the German scientists and they take them off to England, where they secretly tape them. They spy on them to sort of try and find out exactly what they were doing and how far they'd gotten. And from this spying, they discovered that the Germans really were sabotaging their own science so that Hitler would not get hold of an atomic bomb. So what we glean from this is that choices could be made. Even after the war was won against Hitler, they decided to, in fact, use the bomb twice, thereby ushering us all into a completely new level of warfare, one that could literally obliterate the planet. These were choices that were made on purpose. No matter how often in the movie Oppenheimer says, oh, we didn't have a choice, we didn't have a choice, there's a moment that's a telling and terrifying moment in which General Groves discovers from Oppenheimer that by setting off this bomb, by detonating this bomb, they could in fact set off an uncontrolled fusion event which could incinerate the atmosphere, which would be the end of life on Earth. As we know it, all life on Earth for millions of years, if not forever. But even with that horrific possibility staring them in the face, they decide to go ahead anyway. These are leaders making choices for the entire planet based on their own hubris. And I think that really is what the movie is about the choices that men in positions of power make, without consulting anybody, mainly in complete secrecy. So at this point, layers of secrecy. In the old days, in the days where leaders had their heads chopped off, they could in the end not hide from the populace. But today, starting then already, the people in extreme power can in fact hide further and further away from anybody knowing who they really were, who's really making the choices, where are these decisions actually being made. And from my point of view, I go, everything costs money. We need fiat currency for everything. And the fiat currency, the printing thereof, is in the hand of the few, the bankers, the accountants. So in the end, my reading of the situation is the decision is made by them. They decided to finance these things, therefore they went ahead. If they had decided they're not going to let the money go for these sort of things, it would never have happened. So the movie continues, and eventually they do have the bomb, and Oppenheimer's going, oh, because now the war is over, and they now decided they need a new enemy. So the Japanese, conveniently Pearl Harbor, there's a new enemy, and they're going to drop the bomb. At this point, Oppenheimer has no more value. So he isn't told, he isn't consulted, he is told he's a crybaby and he should just go home to his mummy. And he hears about the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the radio along with everybody else. The movie then jumps forward another 10 years to the 1950s, where suddenly we need another enemy. If your country is a war machine, which America, with the help of Nazi scientists, which through Project Paperclip, they had rounded up and imported into America people who belonged to the SS, people who belonged to the SA, people who wore the golden badge of honor of Hitler's favorite few. They were brought into America, they were naturalized, and were set to work to build weapons. Many of them rose through the ranks in the American military and lived a happy old life, even as the Jews were refused entry. All these decisions were made by the hidden hand. So anyway, by the 1950s, a new enemy had absolutely been identified, Russia, and the Cold War was in full swing. And so in order to sweep up the minds of the masses with this propaganda machine, scapegoats had to be found. And who better than Oppenheimer, who had, in his youth, professed a sympathy for socialism, etc. And so he was hauled in front of the McCarthy tribunals and stripped of his security clearances, etc., etc. And in the movie, this is incredibly cleverly done. The movie is stripped of color, he's stripped of dignity, and finally, he sits there butt naked. I think Cillian Murphy and Robert Downey Jr. are both in line for an Oscar. Their roles were incredibly well played. Downey Jr., particularly in his role in Strauss, managed to put the Marvel Universe firmly behind him as he turned on his real acting chops to play his character, a fixer, a rather sleazy lobbyist, as we would call him today, who set up everything, set up everybody, threw people under the bus. But eventually, he also got his comeuppance. And the movie ends and we're all terribly happy. But I think Christopher Nolan really was telling us something about the world in which we live today and the leadership that we have. And this is very relevant in this year as well. 2024 is unusual in that so many of us across the world will be going to the polls to choose our leaders. And what is so awful about it is that we have such poor choices, that our choices really are the best of two evils, and both sides will be a disappointment. But that really is also up to us and how we decide to place our vote. And the only thing I have to say about this, or to think about this, when I think about placing my own vote, is how do I feel after listening to this person speak? Do I feel my passions inflamed? Do I feel angry and self-righteous? And yes, it's my turn now, let them suffer. And I think that anybody who makes me feel that way is somebody that I will not vote for. Because knowing now what I know about the hidden hand and the propaganda and the incredible insight that the advertising and the marketing industries have in our biological, neurological functioning, and they know exactly which buttons to press in order to get whatever emotion they are looking for. They are corralling our emotions. They are herding us like sheep. And it is only when you stop and think about your emotions and say, on the hierarchy of emotions, where are we? If you're out down at the base emotions of passion and anger and outrage, you are being played. You are the puppet on a string. You've got to cut those strings, take a deep breath, and find the candidate who engages your brain, your mind, your cognitive abilities, your prefrontal cortex, so that when you've completed listening to them, you are thoughtful and considerate and are aware that the choices we make today are not restricted to one country or one region. All our choices impact the globe. And this, unfortunately, is particularly true of America, simply because they have this enormous arsenal, because they are in control of the fiat currency that controls the world. And it's particularly awful that they have two such terrible choices to make. But the choice really should be coming, the thing that we can do. There's a lot of things we can't do. It's simply too big. But each small one of us can make the decision to make a choice that is considered, thoughtful, and takes into account that wisdom is an action that considers the benefit of the whole. And the whole, really, at this point, is the entire planet. If we continue on this path of outraged, inflamed, impassioned reactions to uncontrolled emotions, we are heading to a place, environmentally, socially, and economically, that we don't want to go to. The world is once again shimmering, trembling on the edge of catastrophe. On so many levels, there is too much talk of war, too much anger, too much outrage. And the way we can each just temper that is by deciding to make a vote based on our considered emotions. Emotions that understand that our responsibility is not just to us, to me, but to the whole planet. And then perhaps we can slowly start moving our path out of the reach of these men, these persons, the hidden hand who hold the string, and make all these secretive, catastrophic decisions on our behalf without our knowledge or say-so. So, until next time, deep breathing, calm, relaxed, one baby step at a time towards a more harmonious, sustainable, and peaceful future.